Hello, everyone, and today I wanted to explain why the state of New York technically has its own Army, Navy, and Air Force. Now, that might sound a little crazy. It might sound like I'm making that up, but I'm not. And if you'll keep watching this video, you'll understand what I mean by the end of the video. Now, to start off, before we can talk about New York, we have to talk about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Now, I'm not going to get into current politics, but essentially, there's an organization known as the Florida State Guard, which DeSantis, you might have heard some news that the Florida State Guard is nearing complete reactivation. The Florida State Guard is essentially almost completely reactivated. Now, many people wondered why DeSantis was making his own military organization, or at least they thought he was making his own military organization, when in reality he was only reactivating um the Florida State Guard, which had originally been established during World War II. Its purpose was to protect the American homeland in case, or I guess the Floridian homeland, in case of a German invasion, but that never happened. And the Florida State Guard had around, I'm not sure if this is a right number, but I guess 500 members when World War II was going on. That number could be way off, but anyways, 2 years after World War II, the Florida State Guard disbanded, and for decades it was dormant until DeSantis reactivated it. Now, what surprised many people is that at they didn't know they thought that DeSantis was just making his own state military, when in reality, states all across the country had their own state guards or state defense forces, which is just another name for state guard. It's the same thing, but some states have different names for them. Now, more states don't have the majority of states don't have state guards. However, there's still a large amount of states that have state guards. Now, the most notable states that have state guards would be Texas, Alaska, which they call it the Alaska Defense Force instead of the Alaska State Guard, California, Georgia, state of Washington, and New York. Now, getting back on the topic of the core topic of this video, the New York State Guard was established in 1891, and it's been activated during times like World War I, World War II, and I'm pretty sure it was activated during the Korean War as well. Now, you might be wondering, what's the difference between the New York State Guard and the New York National Guard? The New York State Guard is there to protect the state of New York and defensively, and it answers to the governor of New York. The New York National Guard, although the governor can call upon the New York National Guard, the president still has the authority to send the New York National Guard to fight in overseas wars. Now, the core difference is that the New York Guard and the New York State Guard answers to the governor and the governor alone. It doesn't answer to the president, and it can't be federalized. It can't be sent to fight in an overseas war. Now, that should clear up the differences between the New York State Guard and the New York National Guard. And here's a photo of some New York State Guard members. Now, next I want to talk about the New York Naval Militia. And you might be wondering, why did you choose New York? Why didn't you choose another state? And the reason why is because New York is one of the few states that have both um a state guard as well as a naval militia. Now, the naval militia was established around this, like the same year the New York State Guard was established. Some of its members of the New York Naval Militia, to my surprise, fought overseas in the Spanish-American War, and and then I couldn't really find any other examples of the New York Naval Militia fighting in any other overseas war. But that just surprised me because state guards and naval militias typically don't fight in wars overseas. Although that was 100 years ago, and the rules and regulations, there's probably been some things that have changed over the years. Now, the New York Naval Militia, as well as the New York State Guard, I forgot to say this earlier, but during 9/11, they both helped New Yorkers and New York civilians, and they helped with recovery and relief efforts. Now, here's some memories of the New York Naval Militia, and both the New York State Guard and Naval Militia also helped with relief and recovery efforts during Hurricane Sandy, when Hurricane Sandy hit the state of New York. Now, the final thing I'm going to talk about is the New York Wing Civil Air Patrol. Now, this is not to be confused with the New York Air National Guard. The New York Wing of the Civil Air Patrol and the Air National Guard are two separate entities. Now, the New York Air National Guard, it can be called upon to fight in overseas wars. It can be called upon by the federal government. However, the New York Wing is a part of a larger organization known as the Civil Air Patrol, which has wings in every single U.S. state. Now, the core difference between the New York Wing of the Civil Air Patrol and the Air National Guard is that the New York Wing of the Civil Air Patrol, it saves New York civilians. It helps with, emergencies that affect the state of New York, and it saves the state government, and it's not going to be sent to fight in an overseas war. Now, here are some members of the New York Wing Civil Air Patrol, and yeah, so with these three branches, or three, with these three organizations, New York has essentially, New York has the three branches of the military: the New York Guard, which would be New York's Army; the New York Naval Militia, which would be New York's Navy; and the New York Wing of the Civil Air Patrol, which would be New York's Air Force. Now, technically, in an unrealistic scenario where if New York were to declare independence from the United States of America, New York would already have three of the branches of the armed forces, which, again, the New York State Guard would be the New York's Army, the New York Naval Militia would be New York's Navy, and the New York Wing of the Civil Air Patrol would be New York's Air Force. However, even with New York's economic power and New York's large population, I doubt, even in an unrealistic scenario, that if the U.S. federal government still exists, I doubt they'd let New York go without a fight.